1981, Margaret Atwood invited us to consider bread. She said, imagine a piece of bread. You don't have to imagine it. It's right here in the kitchen. It's on the breadboard. It's in a plastic bag. She goes on to talk about this bread in a variety of contexts, a famine, a prison. She even includes a retelling of a German fairy tale which goes like this. There was once two sisters. One was rich and had much money and no children, and the other had 5 and was so poor that she no longer had any food left. She went to her sister and asked for a mouthful of bread. My children are dying, she said. And the rich sister said, I do not have enough even for myself, and drove her away from the door. Then the husband of the rich sister came home and wanted to cut himself a slice of bread, but as he made the first cut, out flowed red blood. Everybody knew what that meant. I view this bread, this fairy tale in particular, as a commentary on the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy, as we've heard, is the ability to feel what somebody else is feeling, to get down in the hole with them, as Brené Brown put it. And while compassion is related, it requires more. With these thoughts in mind, I ask you to consider the wealthy sister. Perhaps she really only did have a loaf of bread, not enough to sustain both herself and her husband. Or maybe her husband had just lost his job, so even with all the money that they had saved, soon there would be no more bread left. Maybe we take a more ethical stance and say that the bread would be just enough to perpetuate the children's starvations, so really, she's doing them a kindness. Or we could take a more capitalistic stance and say that the bread and the sister should have taken care of her children because she made the decision to have them, so she must support them. As we consider the wealthy sister's motivations, these responses showcase a range of sympathy and empathy, but what they do not show is compassion. Compassion, as defined by Berkeley, is the emotional response when perceiving suffering, which includes an authentic desire to help alleviate that suffering. As we thought about the sister, we wondered why and for what purpose, but what we didn't engage with is what we could do as readers, who very likely have bread in our cupboards while there are empty bellies on street corners. Unfortunately, in schools far too often our thinking is grounded in the former, empathy, and falls short of genuinely honoring this impulse to alleviate suffering. For instance, we read To Kill a Mockingbird to explore racism in 1930s rural America. We point our finger at the jury's verdict and say, this is wrong. And in the best of classrooms, we are able to empathetically transfer this understanding to our communities and identify where there is injustice or inequity or even simple racism. And this is empathetic. And it is important to have these conversations. It is important to look, realize, and synthesize, but I'm arguing that it's not enough. Indeed, training our students, our children, our younger brothers and sisters to read empathetically but not compassionately amounts to failure. If we stop there, what would it mean if instead of just reading To Kill a Mockingbird, we ask students to identify an injustice in a community that they care about and then do something about it? All of a sudden, we get students like Dali al-Durrani, who is investigating how we can build home structures in his country of Lebanon to help house Syrian refugees. We get students like Naya Antun, who is teaching herself sign language and creating a website to help others learn so that we can better connect with people who are different than her. We get Jose Guarco and Salam Al-Athri, who, as 9th graders, attempted to build a solar-powered composter just to make Kuwait a little bit more beautiful by bringing more dirt and more flowers into the landscape. And this matters. These projects, these executions of compassionate actions are critically important because this is what we know. We know from studies out of the University of Michigan, Stony Brook University, and Simon Fraser University that compassion has positive impacts on physical and mental health, including speeding up recovery time from disease and injury, lessening depression, and extending our lifespans. We know that acting compassionately is satisfying to the brain. A 2013 study conducted by the National Institutes of Health indicated that the pleasure centers of our brains are equally excited by observing someone giving money to charity as we are when we receive money ourselves. This suggests that we are hardwired not only to feel good about our own actions, but to revel in the delight of someone else being kind. We know also that it doesn't matter how much money we have, what our social status is, how corrupt or uncorrupt we perceive our society to be. Research shows a strong correlation between our personal well-beings and the percentage of money that is spent on other people. So what this means is that when our students undertake clothing drives for needy expat workers, when they raise money to build wells, they are literally extending their lifespans, contributing to the treatment of diseases, and activating the pleasure centers of their brains as well as the brains of others. And all of this happens in spite of potential failure, because what matters is the impulse to be better, not just to be, but to be better in the world in which we live. Think of what could happen if we thought less about the 4 on a rubric and more about the pedagogy that creates opportunity for students to engage with compassion. Think what could happen if we trained students to look at the lens of, here's what I have, and here's what I can do. Projects have greater purpose, learning has greater resonance, and our collective lives are made better. So this is my challenge for you. Take a walk through Mabula, sit down with your nanny, read a book. And as you do, try not to limit yourself to the realm of empathy, of feeling bad for someone, or even feeling bad with someone. But instead, decide what it is that you can do and go and do that thing by leaning into the possibility of failure. Have courage and be kind, because at the end of the day, if we limit our learning solely to empathy, it becomes as useful as an imagined piece of bread is to the hungry. Thank you.